Welcome back. This episode is going to be next to the last one. I think we did 2026, and this one will be 2027 of a redraft. I'm just going to look back at my online league's draft history from the years 2026 through 2031. And so this draft was absolutely loaded. Last episode, I'll give a quick recap. We had the looks like a future Hall of Famer Brumley, and then we got three or four real solid guys at double-digit career WAR here. Just unbelievable pitcher: Miles, Figueroa, Kit, Bailey, Benny, all really successful, and then a little bit of a drop off here. After Benny, not still good players, just relievers and kind of more a little role players, not quite stars here in Birch and Ed, and then a reliever. This draft is a lot more loaded, as you'll see in a second. 2027 was gross. So the first pick, Kevin Booth, was one of the best pitcher prospects you'll see in out of the park. He was a college guy that just was unreal. So we're gonna actually have the same pick in the redraft. The Dodgers get Booth, who's one of the best pitchers in the league, if not the best. The guy has explosive stuff, 80 fastball, 70 forkball, really good change up there. Has a fourth pitch he can use, sometimes a slider. Throws absolute gas, 101 mile an hour fastball. And he really broke out the last few seasons. As you can see, he had a nice slow progression, pretty much got better every year, and peaked last year with a Cy Young. Still only 27 years old on a nice team-friendly contract, so just one of the best all-around players in the league. Not a lot of question there. Who's the first pick? As Booth is just unreal. Pretty much the two best pitchers in the league. In Brumley going first overall in the redraft last year for the 2026 and my redraft, and then 2027 you get Booth. That's essentially the two best guys. So pretty nasty, easy pick there. So next up we have the second pick. Was originally Alex Flores, who was a pretty big bust for Boston. Unfortunately, just didn't get his control, and some other parts of his game didn't come along. So in the redraft, we're going to have Josh Richardson. This was a really tough pick. There's a lot of good guys coming up here, as you can see. But Richardson, he plays a lot of second base because he plays with the best defensive shortstop in baseball in Preciado. So he's over at second base there with his high range, but has all the tools to be a top-notch shortstop for any other team in baseball, pretty much, except for a handful. Really, really, really valuable. Even better ratings the last couple of years. He's lost a little bit off his contact. I think he had like 65 contact at one point, and a little more power, but still just a ridiculous profile if you think of him as a shortstop. He has the 65, 60 in the approach categories there. Nice 50 bat with some gap power. Pretty good base stealing ratings. Really good defense. Just has everything you need. So, guy that has 26 career WAR, actually quite a bit more than Booth. Just an unbelievable player. So that was the second pick there. There's just not too many good middle infielders with nice bats to go around. So I think he'd go second overall in a redraft. Third overall was Montreal pick Chris Briggs, who's been really good for them. I just think Fierro here, just a tad better at the fact that he's like a real high level number one or two starting pitcher. Comes out a little ahead of like a first base DH type for me. But it was pretty close. As you can see, Briggs goes pretty soon after. Fierro here is just was real close to Booth in career numbers. He just doesn't quite have exactly really similar to Booth, just not quite in the movement ratings and the fourth pitch that Booth has, and a little more polish with the stamina hold, but pretty much carbon copy. Otherwise, both have 101 mile an hour, explosive stuff, fastball, slider change, one of the best three pitch profiles you can have. So even though he doesn't have a fourth pitch, he has the ideal three pitch one. Just an incredible player who has, if you look at his numbers here, just been incredible. He had 4.1, 4.5 WAR, 3.6, 4.8 the last few years. So just every single year, just producing crazy strikeout numbers. Always at around 25 to 30 Ks percentage, and the hits under 10. The hits are just a bit high for whatever reason. Maybe that's just the lack of movement. But everything else is just fantastic. He limits home runs pretty well for the lower movement rating. So just a really, really good frontline player. Just be a number one or two on pretty much any team in baseball. So just awesome top three here. Next up on the redraft, we have Jim Seifert, who was a major acquisition for Milwaukee, one of the best teams in the league last year at the trade deadline. Just signed a big extension. Originally, it was Bog Ingram, who's done pretty well. Nice starter, some major stuff. Just not quite at the level of some of these stars here. So Seifert goes fourth overall in the redraft. He was real close. Again, it was kind of Booth and easy number one for me, and then these three were all real close. Seifert could have probably gone second or third, any order really. But I just went with the elite shortstop and the elite ace over him, over a corner bat. But also, you could argue that ratings wise, he's just one of the best players in the league. Huge contact, huge eye, huge on base percentage numbers. Plays really good defense, really good base runner. Just one of the best all around players in the league. Next up, we had Jeff Jackson originally go, who goes really soon after here. I had real close between a few of these pitchers. I went with the tiebreaker in Eric Fair just because the fact that he has a World Series ring and he's a lefty, and he's just been unbelievably consistent. He isn't quite the frontline number one that some Fiero and Booth and Brumley and those guys are, but he's a real good number two, three. Guy has 3.8, 3.7 FIP the last two seasons on a contending team. Has some nice numbers all around. The peripherals look pretty good. 20% K rate pretty much every year, and then about a 7% walk rate every year. And home runs are always right about 1.0, as you can see. And doesn't get let up the 10 hits per nine. So just really solid and consistent. Like I said, real close between a bunch of guys coming up here. But again, for those reasons I just listed, it was kind of a tiebreaker for me. So real good pitcher there. 29 years old, a lefty with extreme movement, fits with about any ballpark in the league. So I love that guy. Next up with Jeff Jackson. So I actually could have probably had him going back to Oakland, but he goes one spot later. This guy has legitimate top two pitcher for any org type talent. He hasn't quite lived up to it the last couple of years on some just little underperforming defenses there in Oakland. Washington are both teams that especially Washington, their stadium, it's real hard. The offense is quite a bit up there, especially batting average, so he gets a little more hits allowed. And Oakland didn't have an elite defense, so I think the numbers would be even better on a really top level team with top level shortstop. Washington's kind of loading up here, so we'll see if he can produce on a good team this year. He has just some awesome numbers. He doesn't quite strike out as much as you'd think for the 60 stuff and 101 miles per hour for whatever reason. It could have been the low catchability or something like that, but we'll see. Should be a guy that can be in the low 20s for that. Really good control and an elite movement. Ratings wise, he's right up there with Booth. Both guys, if you look at the ratings, have a 70 and 260s for the big three categories. So ratings wise, like, he looks like an ace. Just hasn't quite performed like that, but did have a really good year back in 2030. So I think that this guy was on like Milwaukee or one of those teams like an 80 shortstop Montreal. This guy might actually be like a Cy Young contender. So just a little too talented to fall any farther than six. And again, it was really close between him and Fair, and for the reasons I said, the tiebreaker. But you could argue that Jeff Jackson is a little more high end talent, but both guys just been really solid. Next up, another arm. The Chicago Cubs redraft John Hill. John Hill is just awesome. If you look here, John Hill's another guy that made it real far in the playoffs for the Cubs, not last year, but the year before, as one of their key cogs. It's been real consistent the last 5 years, over 147 innings every single year. Always around a 3 WAR, 2.5, 3 WAR. Had almost a 4 WAR season the year before when they made their playoff push, and 4 RWAR. Just an awesome numbers here across the board with the FIP and ERA. 3.8, 3.8 the last 2 years, and strikes out quite a bit of guys, limits the hits pretty well. It's about 6% walk rate. So just everything you need. Another one of those nice 4 pitch guys. Pretty good ratings, a lot of green in that profile. So just real solid, kind of like Fair. Another guy that's just a real solid, like number two. Probably could be actually closer to number one on some teams. Another really good arm. This class just loaded with arms. Next up, we have Chris Briggs going. Chris Briggs is a guy that went third overall, and I think in most redrafts probably could go back in the top three or whatever. This draft's just so loaded with frontline starters that, for what I said earlier, is just the fact that he's like a corner bat, a little easier position to find in free agency. So I think in a redraft, you'd go for those high end number one and two starters. But no slouch either. It's not like he's underperformed to fall from third to eight. Still one of the best bats in the league. Crazy seasons last 2 years, 31 and 42 home runs, ridiculous doubles, 50 and 45 doubles last couple seasons. Just produces monster on base percentage, a real explosive bat in the middle of any lineup. So really good player. That would go higher than eighth in almost every other year, I'd imagine. Joe Curry is going ninth here, just to show how loaded this class was. The same reasons I just said. Another really similar profile to Briggs, almost identical. Just the fact that Curry has a little more contact and a little less eye. Both guys just really similar, though. Both guys just smack the crap out of the baseball. Curry actually won a batting title and led the league in doubles 2 years in a row, 48 and 59, as you can see here. So just ridiculous, ridiculous juiced bats there going eighth and ninth. Cincinnati could really use that bat in a redraft going ninth. And I forgot to mention the last two picks. Michael O'Connor's been pretty decent for Philly. Just doesn't quite have the strikeout numbers. Has really good movement and control. Probably would go and still in the first round of redraft. And Joyner's actually been pretty solid too. Those guys have been really good. This is just a really nice draft. They go a little bit later in a redraft, in my opinion. Next up, we have Michael Oler here, went to Texas, who's been real good for them. But I couldn't pass up Art Van Winkle any longer. The guy has 25 career WAR, which I think is like first place in this entire class. You'd say, why does he go 10th? But I think I'm imagining a redraft just kind of like he's like a first baseman, second baseman. He's lost a little bit of rating, so I don't think he's quite the star he was back when he could had like that 70 contact in the 28 to like 31 years. So he's still really good, but as you can see, those years he was closer to like a 6 WAR guy, where now he's more like a 2 or 3 WAR guy. So really solid player and real clutch on some of their World Series runs there in Detroit, and an awesome defensive player at first base that can play a really solid second base. Also, big time doubles numbers there. 51 doubles led the AL last year. So just a really, really solid player. So Texas could really use that bat in their lineup, I'd imagine. Next up, we have Ben Holston. Ben Holston's another guy that has ridiculous ratings that I'd probably draft a little higher here than his career stats would indicate. But I just think, again, Washington, like I mentioned for earlier for Jeff Jackson, it's just a tough place to pitch in with the offense being so juiced there. I really do think the same reason as Jackson. I think if he went to an elite defense, this guy could probably be closer to like a 4 WAR per season type guy. Has ridiculous ratings across the board: 60, 70, 55 with like 5 pitches. Extreme ground ball with the high movement. Doesn't let up too many home runs, even though he kind of actually has the last few years in Washington. But guy that I just think's ratings wise is one of the better number 2, 3 guys in the league. And just I wouldn't be shocked if he had a breakout season one of these years and just put up a career year. So I think the ratings were just a little too high for me to pass much longer, because he just looks like a guy that could pretty much be an ace with when you have a 60, 70, 55 combo. So we'll see if he keeps just underperforming by a little bit, or if he can really break out and have the year that I think he has a potential to have. Next overall in the redraft, originally here we had Abraham Ursetti, who's one of the best relievers in baseball. But this draft's just so loaded, we just not going to really dip into the relievers until we get past all these star position players. Freddie Underwood is a dude who's just had one of the highest ceilings in the league. A couple of years ago, had a 6.1 WAR season. As a second baseman with 70 range, has major base stealing ability, has lost a little bit of ratings the last couple of years. Looked a lot more dangerous offensively when he had like 55. I think he had like 65 contact, like 55 power and 40 eye or something. But still, even with a little bit of regression in his ratings, he's in his prime there. He still has a really good bat for second base, almost like a shortstop profile, just without the arm. So a really high level second baseman. Just has enough pop in his bat. Still gets close to about 20 homers every single season. Doesn't walk a lot, but doesn't strike out a bunch either. So nice combination just when you have a guy that can hit the ball pretty well, and then once he's on base there, can move around the base pass really well with the 80 stealing and 80 base running. So really good all-around player that doesn't really have a big weakness other than the on-base percentage is a little low. Like really, really good for a middle infielder though still. 14 career WAR out of him, which is awesome. Next up, we have Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh originally took a pitcher who's been solid, just more of like a quad A guy. Has a lot of good pitches, just doesn't have explosive overall anything in his profile, but really been a solid guy. But in the redraft, I have them going with Higuera here. Higuera's really interesting. I actually didn't realize until I went to do this list the fascinating TCR he had. So he was a really elite relief prospect with like the 80, he has 80 stuff out of the bullpen where he's played almost all of his career, and 70 movement and the 2 ridiculous pitches, the fastball and the splitter. And then I noticed at the end of 2031, he got or even 2032, he got a TCR on the cutter. So he got a third pitch and he actually had the 40 stamina. So shockingly, he was one of those ridiculous hard throwing closers that kind of turned into having enough to be able to start. So it looks like they gave him 19 starts last year, got 117 innings. And I think looking at that profile, it's like, man, when you get that third pitch with the high stamina and can pitch that often, whether he keeps starting or just plays more of a stopper role and just gets like 100 innings out of the bullpen with the ability to pitch like multiple times per week with that profile now, go through the order a little better with 3 pitches instead of two. That's a guy that has a ton of potential. So wouldn't be surprised if he starts doing even like man 3 WAR as a reliever is just amazing. Guys hit like 180 off him. A couple of those seasons, striking out almost 40% of batters. So just having that guy with that much explosive stuff from his fastball splitter cutter combination, just real hard to get hits off of. So in a redraft, I think I'd put him at the top of the list out of the like kind of relievers. The fact that he could probably start a few games just looks really interested to see what Cleveland does with him. So just a ridiculous talent. And then in the redraft, I have KC at 14 here. I think Hogan retired unfortunately for them, so that pick didn't turn out too good. In the redraft, I have them taking Orler, who went 10th overall, and so in the redraft he goes a couple spots later, but still a really good player. As you can see, kind of like the same profile as Freddie Underwood with just a tad less power but a little more contact than Freddie Underwood. So similar players to the second baseman there. He can also play a really high level left field and right field. Can even get away with center. Has exact same 65, 80, 80 ratings as Underwood too. Both guys ridiculously good base stealers. He had a 28 stolen base, 3 caught stealing season last year, 2 years ago, and then last year he had 31 stolen bases and 25 the year before that. So just a ridiculous threat, top 5 base stealer in baseball with a lot of on base percentage. Just the ideal leadoff hitter. Really, really would be a superstar if he just had a little more eye or home run power, but has everything else you could ask for in a player. So just pretty much Texas's best player like 3 or 4 years in a row now. So just a franchise player for them. So that another one of those guys that could easily have gone. I think last year, if you were to, that's what I'll talk about after actually the how ridiculous this class loaded is compared to last year. I'll kind of compare probably where I'd take these guys if they were in the draft the year before. And then so that's it for this list. The craziest part about this, I'll go to the game now, was how this and it was so deep that you'll probably notice I went to 14 picks even though I only went to 10 last year because I figured the guys that were going like 14th overall here were probably better than the guys that were going like 6th and 7th last year. So I just wanted to extend the list. I didn't see the fact that I had to limit it at 10. So this draft was too loaded. I went all the way to 14. I'll probably go back to 10 in the next few drafts if they're not quite as loaded, but just wanted to kind of show off how good of a year this 2027 draft was. Unbelievable. So that's just the top 14, and we'll show some of the guys that didn't make it. So the guys that didn't make it are Bob Ingram here, who has an awesome profile and been a really good starter for multiple years there for a rebuilding Nashville team. A ridiculous season out of the bullpen last year, just awesome, and was been a starter for multiple years before that. Michael O'Connor didn't make the list. He has a World Series ring as a starter in Philly. Had really nice movement there. Just doesn't quite have the strikeout percentage some of those other guys have. Striking at like 15, 18% of guys, but really limits the home run. So really solid player too. Joyner wasn't on the redrafted list. Had a really good career too. I can't believe I left off your Esty here. He's just unbelievable. He probably would be the next pick if I was to go to 15 picks. He's just been like an elite lefty out of the bullpen, a closer, stopper, could almost start there. So really, really talented dude too. Josh Kelly's been real solid here, a guy that can play a really high level left field, get away at center field a little bit, and has been playing first base for them. Filling in a need there. So they're loaded outfield and lack of first baseman there. So just a really good all around player. And then we didn't even get into these relievers. Josh Padden's been real solid for Detroit. And then you get some of these really elite closers here. If you sort by stuff, you'll see how ridiculous. I didn't even have Josh Bowers on the list. He's just been ridiculous. Had a 3.6 WAR season as a reliever with a 1.27 ERA, 43% strike rate, one of the best relief seasons you'll ever see. And he didn't even make the list of the top 14 just because the fact that those other guys, the position players and like the number 1 and 2 starters, I didn't have room for these relievers. But as you can see, this guy didn't make the list either. Just unbelievable talents. These guys are just franchise talents when it comes to the back end guys. All number 1 bullpen aces in their respective teams. Ursetti, I didn't even have on the list there. And just Dan Furrow, really ridiculous player too. Multiple like amazing seasons in a row. And so these guys would have been probably like 15, 16, 17 on the list. Pat Reeves or Nellis here. Just probably the best like relief pitcher class ever. So I couldn't even include any of these guys, but I really want to make sure I show them because Yeah, something's in the water this draft class. It was amazing there. So yeah, so this class was a lot of fun to do. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And I think the one other thing I want to talk about before I end is actually how good this class is compared to last year. So 2026, these top five are pretty big stars. Benny's pretty much in that group too. And then I got to the reliever at 7. And so if I was looking at this list, I would probably put these guys. I should have probably put Orr ahead of Higuera there, but like I said, Higuera's ceiling is also pretty high with that TCR he had. But yeah, I'd say I put Van Winkle, Underwood, Orr, all these position players that went 12, like 14, 15, or sorry, they went like 10, 12, 13, 14, and all that. They would all go probably ahead of the 7th pick from last year's draft. So quite a bit more top heavy in 2027. So, anyways, that's it. Again, hope you enjoyed, and we'll jump to the 2028 draft next episode. That was fun.